Welcome, everyone, back to Question Field, the place where you ask the questions and we field them. The we, of course, being myself, Brian, and I'm joined, as always, by Campbell. This week, instead of some witty banter to get us going, how about we cut the frills and we just hop right back into our discussion on lasers? I mean, I do recommend that you check out last week's episode, but maybe you're feeling a little dangerous, in which case you can join us again. And so here's our discussion, starting right now.
Okay, but there are some sort of issues with that story.
Okay.
So we can sort of maybe get into more of the weeds now as to
Sure.
How these things are actually going to work. Now, the first thing is I said that we have these. Well, we've got this column of gas, and the first thing is that if you just have this one column of gas, a photon on average is going to travel through maybe half the length of that column. Light that passes through this gain medium experiences amplification, so its intensity goes up by a factor which looks like e to the power of something times the length of the gain medium that it goes through. Does that make sense? So it's sort of like as you increase the length of the gain medium, the amount of amplification goes up exponentially.
So really long pipe for...
Exactly.
Okay.
Very long pipe would be great. Except we don't really want to have a laser that is, I don't know, 100 meters long or something like that.
Yeah, you don't want to leave too many defensive... The smaller it is, the easier it'll be to defend. And
Absolutely. So the solution to this is we put mirrors on both ends of the tube. And so this is where the similarity to your mirrored box comes in. So we've got this column of gas and we've got mirrors at both ends. And so now the light is traveling through the gas many times because it's bouncing between the mirrors. Okay, but we would quite like a laser beam, right? We would like something coming out of the other end. And so what we usually do is we make one of those mirrors kind of semi-transparent. So some of the light is going to be reflected, but some of the light is going to pass through.
So we're not just taking like a paper clip and punching a little hole into it.
We are, usually not doing that. And
okay. Just to be clear. Okay.
That's right.
Good to know.
And I guess the reason would be that so light passing through a hole experiences something called diffraction, where it sort of spreads out. Even light that is what we call plane waves. So all of the light is in phase, it's traveling in the same direction, and the peaks line up with the peaks and the troughs line up with the troughs. Even that light, after it passes through a hole like an aperture, it spreads out. And so the amount of spreading is increased if you decrease the size of that hole. So we would like the laser beam to be traveling in one direction, and that means we would like quite a large hole in comparison to the wavelength of the light. And so that means it's better to have a semi-transparent mirror rather than a little tiny hole that we punch into the mirror. I'm sure there are other reasons as well that I'm not giving justice to, but I think that's off the top of my head that I would say that would be a good reason why you wouldn't want to do the hole punch method rather than the semi-transparent mirror method.
Okay. All right, I'll invest in the semi-transparent mirrors. You've sold me.
But it is a bit counterintuitive, right? Because you think, well, you get all of this amplification, but you're not getting as great a power in your final output beam as you could. So that's a sort of trade-off you make. But the benefit of these two mirrors is that a photon is going to be bouncing off the mirrors multiple times, which means it's passing through the gain medium multiple times and experiencing a lot of amplification because that amplification is exponentially increasing with the length of gain medium it passes through.
Right.
Okay, so that's one aspect of the sort of reality of this laser system that we're designing. But you might think, as you suggested with the light box, that you would have mirrors around the tube so that all of the light was sort of concentrated into the tube, right? That turns out not to be the way that it actually works in practice. What we have is mirrors on both ends of the tube, but nothing preventing the light from escaping either side.
Right, okay.
So you can imagine that some of the light, if it's not directed completely down the axis of the tube, is going to get lost and going to escape out of that tube.
Right.
Whereas light that is passing, or light that is directed really closely down the axis of that tube is going to pass through the gain medium multiple times without getting dispersed and and escaping out one of the sides of the tube.
Right.
And the reason that we have this sort of semi-open tube system is that selects only a very small number of discrete frequencies that can be amplified by the tube. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay, so if you imagine a string, like a violin string or a guitar string or something like that, one of these classic things that you learn about when you learn about waves are standing waves. So a standing wave, you've maybe heard about standing waves before?
Yeah. So your string has a length, and if your wavelength is either the length of the string or some integer division of the length, and you get your
like the nodes of the
that's what I was saying.
The wave.
To kind of match up right at the start and the end, and then it will stand as it's
exactly. Yeah. This standing wave is like a wave which doesn't propagate energy. If you look at it, it's like the entire string is sort of moving up and down without these little packets that are moving backwards and forwards. And so that sort of process happens with light as well. You get sort of nodes at both ends of this box or this cavity that we've created. So nodes of the wave at the two mirrors, and then in between you get standing waves, which are the electric and magnetic fields oscillating greatly in the middle. And so it turns out that when you make one of these boxes called a resonator, you can only have certain allowed wavelengths that can resonate or have standing waves inside this box. It's just like on a string, you can only have a standing wave with a wavelength which is like half of the length of the string, or I think you can have twice the length of the string because you can have one exactly, one half wavelength taking up the entire length of the string, and then you can have a quarter of the length of the string and so on. So same thing with light in a resonator box. But if you create a 3D resonator, so if you have mirrors on all sides of your box, the number of allowed wavelengths which can form standing waves inside that box.
Oh, it's gonna go up.
Exactly. Yeah, you're going to have many, many more. And that's not what you want. You only want to select one specific wavelength. And you might say, well, we've already selected one wavelength with this transition. Yes, except that was a very simplified picture. Right. And in reality, instead of having one wavelength which is going to experience gain, which is one wavelength which is going to be amplified, there's this whole sort of continuum of wavelengths which can be amplified, and you get sort of different levels of amplification depending on your wavelength. And one of them is going to experience the greatest level of amplification, but you're going to have amplification around a whole bell curve of frequencies. Right. And so the reason that you have these mirrors then is that maybe all sorts of wavelengths are going to experience amplification, but only one of those wavelengths is going to be able to form a standing wave inside this resonating box. And the other ones are just going to sort of... Right,
they're just going to fizzle
dissipate.
out. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I guess you kind of want to tune your cavity length to just one one ideal.
Yeah, so the one wavelength that you want to select for.
All right, so costs are going up because of our transparent mirror, but we don't need to get as many mirrors as we initially budgeted for.
Yeah, I guess so. Okay. That's right.
Excellent.
That's one sort of aspect to consider. And this by the way, this region of wavelengths that can experience gain or amplification comes with an associated mathematical thing called the gain profile. So that's basically like a curve which you have if you imagine having the frequency or wavelength on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you have what's called the gain coefficient, so the sort of amount of gain that you can get out of the gain medium at that frequency. And then you get this curve, which is the gain coefficient versus the frequency, and that curve is called the gain profile. Okay. So it's like a bell curve, and it's peaked. The bell curve is peaked at the sort of frequency that we want, based on the sort of atomic transition that we have selected for in the gain medium. And what we would really like is that the length of our tube selects out that one frequency that we want to amplify right at the peak of that gain profile.
Right.
And then if we do that, we are hopefully getting lasing.
Beautiful.
We could, it's kind of an interesting set of quantum mechanical things that produce the broadening of that gain profile. Because initially I said, well, you only have this one transition, right. between the first excited state and the ground state, and all of the light produced is going to be in that wavelength. And all of the light that can be amplified is going to be in that wavelength.
Right.
Do you have any ideas as to why it might be the case that, in fact, more wavelengths than just that one can be gained or can experience amplification?
Because atoms are fickle.
So one thing that could happen is probably something that most people have heard about. It's the Doppler effect. So that's the effect that means that if you're going past an ambulance, or an ambulance is more likely going past you, you hear the frequency of sound sort of shifting down as it moves away from you compared to when it's moving towards you. So the sort of wavelength of the sound gets bunched up as it moves towards you, and so the wavelength decreases. And as it moves away from you, the wavelength gets sort of spread out because of its motion relative to you.
And in an acoustic sense, we would hear that as like a change in pitch. So
exactly.
It's rising and
that's right.
and falling. Yeah.
Perfect. And so that happens with light as well. So if an atom is moving towards you and you shine some light on it, the atom sees light which is slightly shifted into a smaller wavelength compared to the light that you think you're sending at it.
Right.
And if it's moving away, it's shifted to a slightly larger wavelength. And so that Doppler shift is important in cosmology and astronomy.
That's how we know that everything is moving far away from everything else.
Exactly. But it's also important in the operation of lasers. So, for example, if an atom, from the perspective of the atom...
Can I take a stab at it? So,
please go.
Yeah, so I guess it would be, you have your excited electron that's ready to get whack-a-moled, and the light is coming towards it, but it's going to see it as a lower frequency of light than it needs. Is that
necessary? Yeah, well, it depends on the relative motion between the atom and and the sort of source of the light.
Yeah, so the point is that it's not going to be what it wants necessarily. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. It's not going to be at the frequency that corresponds to its energy transition. Or alternatively, if I send some... Maybe the transition corresponds to this very specific frequency of green light, and I send some blue light at it. Now, blue light has a shorter wavelength, and the atom is moving is moving away from me. So all of the light that I send to it, it sees as slightly redder. It's slightly longer wavelength than it actually is, or than it is according to me. And so because that light is stretched out according to the atom thinks, oh, this is perfect. The light's coming at me and it's got the right energy now, and so I can release my photon. I can be stimulated, emitted, or whatever. So, but according to me, it doesn't have the right energy, and so we've got this range of energies because these atoms are traveling at all sorts of different speeds relative to me, and so because of that, we get this range of energies that can cause stimulated emission. Okay, so that's one reason. There are other reasons as well. And the other reasons have to do with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So this is a very famous principle from quantum mechanics, and the specific one that I'm thinking of relates uncertainty in energy with a duration of time, or uncertainty in time. It's a bit of a weird side of the principle. So what that means is that in this particular context, if an excited state is only existing for a short period of time, then there is some uncertainty in the energy of that excited state. So there is a reason that we can think of these excited states as only existing for a short period of time. The first is that in this gas, these atoms are bouncing off each other with really high frequency. And so each time they bounce off each other, they sort of get randomized, right? They get chucked into some other energy state, or maybe they go back to their ground state. But each time they are sort of, on average, just getting completely reset into some random state. So the excited state is only existing for a sort of short period of time because of that. And so this means that the transition, the atomic transition, is again sort of broadened a little bit. This is called collision broadening. And so we get a range of frequencies that can experience gain. Similarly, we also have something else which is causing a shortening of the time in which the atom can remain in its excited state. So that is, if you remember from earlier, that's the spontaneous emission. So because these atoms can spontaneously emit light, it means that they are not in that excited state for an infinite amount of time. There's some finite cap on how long they are remaining in that excited state for.
Yeah.
And so because of that finite...
It's tough to stay excited. Like, give me good news, I'll be excited, but not forever.
That's right.
So I empathize.
Yeah.
So.
That's right. So, maybe our audience are thinking, well, I can understand being unexcited by things right now. Hopefully not. Yeah, so anyway, so the fact that these excited states have a finite lifetime means that there's uncertainty associated with the energy of those excited states because of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And so we've got this collision broadening, and then we've got the broadening associated with spontaneous emission, which is called radiative broadening. And so, all of this, along with the Doppler effect, is contributing to this broadening of the gain profile, this phenomenon in which multiple frequencies of light can experience gain. And that's why we need this resonating box to select out only one of them. Okay, so that was a lot of quantum mechanics
so many ways
stuff.
to break our laser.
Yes, indeed. And indeed, there's also a kind of another... Well, there are many more things to consider in our laser design. For example, our pump needs to be above a certain power. We need to input above a threshold power, because if it's below this power, then there aren't enough atoms in the excited state in comparison to those in the ground state, and we don't get the population version that we want.
Right.
And importantly, the rate of spontaneous emission might be too high in comparison to our pump rate, so it could, all of our atoms in the excited state could just sort of fall down into the ground state more rapidly than we promote them from the ground state into the excited state. Okay, so there's this principle of threshold that you need to be above. That's another thing to consider.
Good pump. Put it on the list.
That's right. Maybe that's enough to think about for now. Yeah, another thing maybe could be to talk about is saturation. So after a certain intensity of light, after the light sort of gets amplified by a certain amount, the amount of amplification goes down because the population of the excited state sort of becomes equal to that of the ground state. And so there's this sort of efficiency window where if you go too high with the pump rate, then you're not getting as much bang for your buck in terms of the intensity of light that's coming out. So, okay, all of these things to consider.
So get a good pump, but not one that's too good. We need a Goldilocks pump. It's got to be
exactly
custom fitted.
Exactly right.
It sounds like this is like it's like amazing because it's one of those things where I haven't looked up the history of the laser. Like maybe somebody had an idea for this. Maybe this was like all an accident, but like we kind of built up this beautiful scenario of how we can just get this nice domino cascade effect, and now it's just like I can just imagine the first group of people trying to make the first laser, and they're just like, ugh, our threshold. We're not meeting the threshold. We need more power. And then it's like, now you're saturating it, like, and just going back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Many fights were probably had. It was worse than a game of Risk. It was a bloodbath. But then they got it to work.
It's a difficult thing to build a laser. I mean, the principles behind it, this spontaneous emission, stimulated emission, all that stuff, that was discovered by Einstein in the early 1900s. But it took until the 60s to actually build a proper working laser.
Really? Wow.
So yeah, it's no mean feat. But for you want a laser that can blow up a planet, don't you?
Ideally.
Yeah.
Or significantly damage. I mean, listen, you blow up one, the rest are going to get in line, right? So even if it's a smaller planet, like we can probably get away with that and just be fine. So I'm not asking for like the biggest laser. It just needs to, but big enough.
Okay, fair enough. And for purely benevolent reasons, of course.
It goes without saying, Campbell. Goes without saying, of course.
Cool. So there is actually somebody who has thought about the energy that would be involved in
oh my gosh.
in destroying a planet. And in fact, there's even some people who have calculated the energy bill that you would incur if you tried to blow up a planet. Apparently, just if you were interested, the cost per day to run a Death Star is 6.2 octillion British pounds.
Wow.
So
wow.
Something similar in USD.
God, and with the exchange rate, I'm going to be buried.
Particularly these days.
I'm never going to financially recover from my Death Star.
So the way that they worked out the amount of energy that you would need to produce is they thought about, okay, so you've got this planet, and we imagine it's sort of a bunch of tiny little rocks. What's the energy that you would need to put in to move all of these rocks off to infinity? So sort of overcoming the gravitational potential energy that's holding these rocks together. And for a planet the mass of the Earth, that turns out to be, I think it's 10 to the power of 32 joules of energy. That's pretty...
that's up there. That's up
pretty
there.
high.
Yeah.
Yeah. 10 to the 32 joules. Apart from that being like an insane amount of energy, and you've got to get that energy somehow, light has, based on relativity and also sort of classical electromagnetism, light has momentum. So this is sort of one of the principles that Einstein helped come up with. So because of the conservation of momentum, if you are producing a huge amount of energy in the form of light, and the momentum that light carries is given by the energy divided by the speed of light, so E divided by C. So if you work out the amount of momentum that the light carries...
Is it going to spit my Death Star back out of the solar system?
Exactly. It's going to produce some recoil on the Death Star, and that momentum needs to be the same in magnitude as the light has in order to satisfy conservation of momentum. And if you work out how much momentum or what sort of speed that would produce for the Death Star to preserve momentum, I think they approximated the mass of the Death Star to be 10 to the 17 kilograms. So how did they work that out? So 10% solid metal, and I think the size of the moon or something like that. Anyway, so some large amount of mass, but not too big. Then the speed that it's going to be moving at after all of that momentum is transferred into it is about 3% the speed of light. So pretty fast, which I think quite. I mean, sorry to remind you of the lack of originality of your wonderful idea, Brian, but I think that provides a very funny alternative idea for these Star Wars scenes. Just producing this laser beam and the Death Star getting shot off in the opposite direction. Everybody
on board gets liquefied immediately.
Exactly. So a lot of energy, a lot of
That's hilarious. That's
a lot of momentum.
That's so funny.
And just for comparison, okay, here we go. That amount of energy, 10 to the 32 joules, was it? Yeah, 10 to the 32 joules.
Yeah, do we have like a comparison to the sun or something? Like,
Sure. So that amount of energy is 10. Well, it's 2 times 10 to the 25 kilowatt hours. So that's a different unit of energy. So roughly 10 to the 25 kilowatt hours. So that kilowatts are a unit of power, so energy per second, which means that if I run this laser beam for an hour, then it spits out, or then it has to produce 10 to the 25 kilowatts of power in order to dump that required amount of energy into the planet for an hour. So in comparison, so a kilowatt laser is really, really, really powerful. So you can buy your laser pointers that they have something like 5 milliwatts of power. So this is so a kilowatt, for example, would be 10 to the 6 times as powerful. A 1 watt laser is pretty dangerous, so it could blind you very easily, for example. And but you can still buy them; they're available for commercial consumption. A kilowatt laser,
Cool. Let's just put a disclaimer. We're having fun on this podcast. Don't do it. Don't be stupid with lasers, dear listeners. We're having fun here. We're just talking about theoretically getting our hands on some lasers. Don't be stupid. We're not responsible.
That's true.
Yeah. That said,
Please don't sue us. Let's see if we can actually find a kilowatt laser. Not for sale.
I see here the U.S. Army will test a 300 kilowatt laser. Oh,
there you go. A 300 kilowatts.
Cheerful.
Again, purely for benevolent reasons, I assume. Apparently, an IMAX projector array is about 30 kilowatts. There you go. Okay, so there you go. Some points of comparison. So if you had this, what was it, 300 kilowatt laser that the US Army is producing, then you would need 10 to the power of 23 or so of those lasers in order to power your Death Star. So that's
quite a few. Quite a few.
A lot of lasers. Yeah. And okay, so let's see what the sun puts out. I think it seems like it's kind of comparable, actually.
It's so hard Googling this stuff because it's like, oh, you want to buy solar panels? It's like, no, I'm trying to take over the solar system.
Exactly. Some figure that I found for the total power of the power output of the sun is about 10 to the 23 kilowatts. So it's actually kind of comparable. We want a power of 10 to the... What do we want? 10 to the 25 or so.
Okay.
So 100 times more powerful than the sun. And that's to blow up a planet over the course of an hour, right?
Oh yeah. It's gonna take. It's gonna take.
It's gonna take a little while. So maybe if you wanna, bring that down a little bit, then you've got to a minute. Maybe then you need a 10 to the 26 or something like that kilowatts.
Yeah.
So we need 100 to 1,000 times more power than the sun puts out in total at the moment.
All right. Well, we have the laser figured out. So just harnessing that much energy from the sun. If we can, I feel like we got the hard part over with. So get out our Dyson spheres and we'll be right there.
Although something else to consider is that when you use a laser pointer, right, or a laser, it sort of heats up a little bit, produces a bit of heat. And I think from a very small amount of Googling that I've done about the sort of efficiency of these lasers, they are not actually particularly efficient at converting electricity to light. So some of that electricity energy is converted to heat, and like a sort of decent percentage of that energy. So you're dumping a lot of energy into your Death Star. You're going to need to dissipate that energy somehow. Hopefully it's not going to be too much to melt the Death Star, but if you've got it on the order of 10 to the 32 joules of energy, or maybe let's be generous and say 10 to the 30 joules of energy that is going into your Death Star, then that's the
sauna in our Death Star is going to be immaculate.
Absolutely. In fact, let's see. So if we've got say we have about 10 to the 30 joules of heat, and we've got a Death Star of mass 10 to the 17 kilograms. So there's this formula that relates the heat or the change of temperature of an object based on the amount of heat that you put into it, the mass of the object, and something called the specific heat capacity. So if we take let's say it's made out of steel, you can take the specific heat capacity for steel, which is 420 joules per kilogram per degree Celsius. So our formula is, for those following along at home, energy or heat, Q, is equal to mass times the specific heat capacity times the change of temperature. So, cracking out the paper here, pen and paper, we've got a heat of 10 to the 30 joules, or was it joules or kilojoules? I think it was joules, yeah.
Joule,
and we've got specific heat capacity of 420 joules per kilogram per degree Celsius, and we've got a mass of 10 to the 17 kilograms. So that's a change of temperature, 10 to the power of 10 Kelvin.
All right. That sounds like soup, if not.
I think that's probably above the melting point.
Yeah, probably. But just clears it. Just clears it. While you were doing that, Campbell, I was looking on Wikipedia, and it says that the Death Star was made out of quadanium steel or quadanium alloy, which was an extremely durable metallic substance.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you go. So it must have an extremely high specific heat capacity. Nice.
Well,
cool. All right. Well, now we know what we need to do to make the Death Star.
Yeah, some hiccups, but listen, we don't do it because it's easy. We do it because it's hard.
We do it because it's right.
Right, exactly.
It's the right thing to do.
Exactly, yeah. Listen, like I said, asking for a friend, just trying to take over the listeners in Andromeda, you're safe. You're fine. I guess until Andromeda and the Milky Way collide. But sights are only set on the Milky Way right now, and all of these tests we have to do here in the solar system. So everybody is mostly safe for right now, for a little while. And that's that. No, seriously, Campbell, thank you as always. This was a really fun episode. I mean, they're all fun in their own way, but this, I think this is. Felt like I was able to hold my water a little more than usual.
I think you came right in the end. Let's say, Brian, and I'm proud of you. Well, thank you everyone for listening and tuning in this episode.
This has been a get ready for this. I just came up with this. This has been a Gain Media production.
Ooh, wow, incredible. That's a game changer.
As always, this is Question Field, the place where you ask your questions and we field them. But all right, thank you, everybody. Until next time.
You've been listening to Question Field. Question Field is a Gain Media production and is produced by its hosts Campbell McLaughlin and Brian Buchanan. For more information, please check us out on Instagram at QuestionFieldPod, on Twitter at QuestFieldPod, and on TikTok at QuestionField. If you have a question you'd like to submit, or would simply like to leave a message, please send us an email at questionfieldpod@gmail.com. Recently, the James Webb Telescope discovered 5 new stars located in the review section of your favorite podcast app. Thank you for listening.